Welcome to the Concussion Summit. I'm here with Dr. Nick from the Neurologic Wellness Institute in Chicago, Illinois, and he's here to talk today about nutrition and concussion. So thank you so much, Dr. Nick, for being here. I'm really excited to hear your talk.
Thanks for having me.
And so let's start off with, what can you do for concussion as far as nutrition? Maybe what can you do before you ever get concussed? What can you do in the acute phase after the concussion? What can you do more in the chronic phase for post-concussion? I think this is an interesting topic because a lot of therapies and a lot of the patients we see need kind of rehab or vestibular rehab or manual therapy or a lot of different therapies they need to come to the clinic for. But nutrition is something that people could really take a hands-on approach on their own. And so I'm interested to hear your take on what can people do in regards to nutrition to enhance their recovery from any injuries or any brain injuries or post-concussive syndromes.
Of course. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about. A little bit of prevention, but then a lot of acute and chronic management of it.
Perfect.
Okay. So like Dr. Traster said, I'm Dr. Nick, and I work at the Neurologic Wellness Institute in Chicago. And we're going to be talking mostly about how we can not only eat, but then different supplements we can take before for concussion prevention, and then also acute management and chronic management. And so the first one here is, I just wanted to put this paper on. It's a very new article, from 2021, so within the last year. And it basically just says that there is a lot of evidence for nutrition in sports-related concussion and traumatic brain injury. But if you look at the conclusion at the bottom, nutritional supplementation has emerged as a potential strategy, and that can prevent or reduce these deleterious effects of concussion. But in the results section, they kind of say how there is so much that we don't know, and there's so much that can be possible, and most of that is based on animal studies. It's really hard to do studies on humans with concussions because we can't just give people concussions like we can give animals. And so I'll go through a couple studies that are on humans, but there's a lot of evidence that we can pull from different areas and then just suggest or work with what we have there. So the first slide here, I just want to talk about real quick about everything that we're going to be doing for nutritional management of a concussion is going to be based on decreasing inflammation and decreasing free radicals, decreasing oxidants that can cause inflammation. And so if we look at what happens here is we have a tissue insult. So we have a hit to the head. We have a whiplash-like injury where the brain moves around in the skull. And within seconds to minutes to hours to days, we have this like cascade of reaction. And we want to make sure that by the end of the concussion, by the end of the inflammation, that there is less damage throughout the entire brain and it's more localized. And so the goal with nutrition is trying to decrease how long the inflammation stays around. And so with the tissue insult, we have things like injuries to the blood vessels, injuries to the brain cells themselves, or the axons, basically how the brain cells connect to each other. We could have bleeding in the brain. We could have cell death, which is necrosis. Then later on, you get damage to the brain via like a lack of oxygen to brain cells, which means then they don't work as well. You could have this BBB as blood-brain barrier disruption. So with blood-brain barrier disruption, we get more toxins that kind of flood the brain, more inflammation, which is the next one, the vasogenic edema, meaning just swelling, excitotoxic edema, again, swelling of the cells. Inflammatory mediators happen. We have metabolic disruptions, which I'll show later about how glucose, which is our basic blood sugar, our basic fuel source, is not as well used by brains after a concussion. And then again, inflammation, more free radicals, which are these things that just damage cell membranes and therefore cause more inflammation. Excitotoxicity, which is these normal cell signals or normal brain signals, which are excitatory, can become actually toxic because we have this like wave of too much uncontrolled activity in the brain rather than a controlled, coordinated fashion. And then lastly, necrosis, apoptosis, those are just cell death, names for cell death. And cell death leads to then inability to perform how we want. And so I'm going to start first with kind of talking about what to do first, acute concussion. And then as we go, it'll kind of be more involved with the chronic and then hitting back on what we can do preventatively as well. So after a concussion, I just mentioned that the brain doesn't use, or brain cells don't use, glucose very well. And so one of the best things we can do is actually fast for up to 24 hours after a concussion. So my suggestion is always, like, if you get hit in the head, just, you don't need to eat anything, drink, you can just drink water and fast for as long as you can. Most people after a concussion, they don't feel good. They may have nausea, they may have a headache. So they don't have that innate need, like, I need food, I need to eat. And so it kind of helps to our advantage. And if we're fasting for up to 24 hours, what we're doing is we're getting our body to make more ketone bodies, and we're not giving it a lot of glucose or sugar, which can inherently be inflammatory, but also the brain cells aren't using it very well. And so I'll kind of explain more of that here in a sec. But then after the first 24 hours, we're going to decrease the amount of general calories that we're going to be eating and use more of, you get more nutrients. And so for 48 to 72 hours, possibly you can even go up to a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, depending on where symptoms are. We're going to eat low calorie carbohydrates like vegetables, some fruit, some moderate protein, and lots of fat. And so what this looks like is, it looks like the ketogenic diet. And so there are lots of studies showing that the ketogenic diet can improve outcomes in a concussion, whether it's preventatively or acutely after. Now, it's hard to do a ketogenic diet preventatively for athletes because most of the time athletes need a lot of carbohydrates. They need more quick energy, and a lot of times the sports that are using it, they need to be bigger, more active, and it's hard to get maybe as much protein, fuel, calories without eating some carbohydrates. But on the other hand, doing it right after a concussion can be very beneficial. So what does a ketogenic diet look like? You're going to be eating about 70 to 75% fat. And so fat can come from fat from beef or animal products, dairy, butter, some nuts, nut butters, dairy milk, avocados or healthy fats like avocado oil, olive oil, eggs. And then 15 to 20% of the calories are coming from protein. So protein is, of course, any meat. So that would be eggs, cheese can still have protein, steak, other red meat. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be a very expensive diet. Red meat can come in stew meat or chuck roast, which is very easy, ground beef. And then 5 to 10% of the calories would be more of the carbohydrates, like vegetables that are like fibrous, fruits like berries, avocados technically are fruit, and that has some carbs, tomatoes, peppers, onions. And so typically what I like to suggest is most meals are going to be a protein that's a higher fat. So salmon, ground beef burger, stew meat, anything like that. Probably not like chicken. If you have chicken, then you have to add some more cheese or some other fat to it. And then some sort of vegetable. And that vegetable can be a salad with some good salad dressing, ideally homemade salad dressing with like olive oil, avocado oil that is not going to have poor vegetable oils, which I'll get to here in a sec. Or just a cooked vegetable, steamed vegetables that have some sort of oil on top. And again, the good oils like butter or avocado oil, olive oil, tallow, lard, things that aren't rancid like vegetable oils. So again, why not carbs and sugar? Okay, so this is directly from this paper from Prince and Matsumoto, 2004. Basically, what it shows is a cell here. And inside the cell, you have a mitochondria. The mitochondria is where the energy is being produced inside the cell. And if we look here, the 1 through 5 are areas in the brain or areas in the cell that when a brain injury happens, things are going to be decreased or there's going to be a poor reaction. And so number 1 is that glucose, there's a decreased glucose uptake into the cell. So even though the cell needs more energy to heal, it is not getting that energy via glucose because the channels are not picking it up. Then through this process, there's a decrease in glycolytic processing. So glucose has to be converted into another molecule before it can go into this mitochondria to go through other chemical reactions to make energy. Energy is ATP. Well, glycolysis slows down in a brain injured cell. And so not only are we not getting enough glucose, but we're not having that glycolytic process occur as well. Then the glucose is mostly going through this pentose phosphate pathway, which is actually very important. The pentose phosphate pathway helps to produce the body's most endogenous antioxidant called glutathione. And that helps to quench or remove free radicals. And like I said before, free radicals cause inflammation. So that's really important. Number 4 is that there's that decrease in ATP production, which makes sense. We talked about that. If there's not enough of this glycolysis happening, we're going to have less ATP. Less ATP means less energy for the cell to heal. And then lastly, a TBI or a concussion is going to cause increased oxidative damage to proteins, like enzymes, to lipids, like the outer wall of the cell, and then DNA, which we know is all important. And so these free radicals increase, and therefore we need ways to get rid of that. And if glucose is not able to be taken up, then we should be looking more towards ketone bodies. Ketone bodies are just an alternate fuel source that the brain can't really use unless you are on a ketogenic diet or you're fasting, where you're not giving your body glucose. And then you're making ketone bodies from the fat that you're eating or the fat that's stored on your body. And it does not need to go through glycolysis. It goes right into the mitochondria. It goes right into the Krebs cycle and then the electron transport chain to make energy. And so again, it only takes 3 steps to get there rather than glucose doing a lot more. There is also reduced coupling of this molecule called NAD, which happens right here at the electron transfer chain. Therefore, we can actually decrease the amount of free radicals by using ketones. There's going to be more energy produced using ketones, especially in injured brain. And then lastly, we actually have more glutathione peroxidase activity, which helps to regenerate that glutathione to get rid of those oxidants, which again is really important in kind of decreasing inflammation. So not only ketones are better and more efficient as an energy source for the brain after concussion, but it helps to decrease inflammation naturally as well. So that's why it's really important to maybe fast first, get that initial insight into producing ketone bodies, but then to go more towards a ketogenic diet for, again, 2 to 3 days or until symptoms are gone, maybe up to 3-4 weeks. Chronically, for chronic management, you could do a ketogenic diet for 3-4 months before you want to maybe start cycling on or off of it. And of course, that depends where your symptoms are at as well. And so now let's chat a little bit about the kinds of fat. And so we have basically all kinds of fat are good on the ketogenic diet, except for one kind, and that is a lot of omega-6 fats, or omega-6 fats being mostly from vegetable oils. So plant seed oils. These are cottonseed oil, sunflower oil, safflower oil, corn oil, soybean oil. These are oils that have a lot of omega-6. Omega-6 is naturally more inflammatory down here. But omega-6 oils from these vegetable oils also become rancid. They are more likely to produce those free radicals or have those oxidants, which then are just damaging to put into our bodies. Not a big fan of the picture in that they have beef and eggs on here. In the whole scheme of things, it doesn't have, beef and eggs do not have much omega-6 fatty acids in them. And they're actually very equal when it comes to a ratio between omega-6 and omega-3. much better than those plant oils. So on the other hand, we want to increase omega-3 fats more than a typical person. In that if we want to prevent a concussion, the brain runs on omega-3 fats, especially DHA, docosahexaenoic acid. And so preventatively, we want to increase omega-3s, but also acute management-wise, we want to increase omega-3s. So the first omega-3 on here, alpha-linolenic acid, is mostly from plants. There is only a little distribution, like this is like flaxseed oil or flax seeds, chia seeds. There's only about 10% that can be converted in our body to EPA, and then like 0.5 to 1% to DHA. And so it's hard to get our omega-3 fats from a plant source like alpha-linolenic acid. Therefore, it's much better to take fish oil or to eat fatty fish like sardines and salmon. And omega-3, unlike the omega-6, are much more anti-inflammatory. They have resolvins and protectins that are inflammation resolving or inflammation reducing. And so that's the kind of route we want to go. This article is from TCU. And so it was looking at prevention of head trauma or prevention of concussions in football players. And what they did is they measured a specific biomarker called neurofilament light, or NFL. That was a biomarker for axonal injury, or injuries to the connections between neurons, between cells in the brain. And so they had athletes, NCAA football athletes, take either 2 grams, 4 grams, or 6 grams of docosahexaenoic acid, DHA, and then play a football season. And then they measured the amount of neurofilament light in their blood after the season. And irrespective of the dose, supplementing with DHA attenuated or decreased the amount of neurofilament light in players that were starters, non-starters, players that played only a little bit, to players that played every single snap. And so that's pretty cool. So we know that DHA can be used preventatively for concussions. Now, how much should you really take? 2, 4, and 6, those are all big doses. I'll kind of get to that here in a sec. And so this here is an omega-3 protocol by Dr. Michael Lewis. Dr. Michael Lewis wrote the book When Brains Collide. He was a medical doctor for the United States Army. And in his protocol, he talks about how omega-3s are really important for the brain, both preventatively and after a concussion, as I just mentioned. And so we want to get a good source, first of all, of EPA and DHA. And so I just put a couple bottles up here. Nordic Naturals is good. Genestra is really good. Both of these are in triglyceride form. You want triglyceride form because triglyceride form, not this ethyl ester, is going to be better absorbed. It's not going to cause fishy burps or any kind of side effects. If you are looking for soft gels are harder to find in triglyceride form, while all liquids, for the most part, are best concentrated at a higher dose, best bang for your buck, and they're all in triglyceride form. So what his suggestion is basically week 1 after a concussion, you have a high loading dose. That high loading dose is going to be 3 grams or 3,000 milligrams of EPA plus DHA combined. So you basically add up those two on the back of the bottle and you see how many teaspoons you need to get to 3 grams. This is all based on weight, based on a couple studies done in rats that did 40 milligrams per kilograms of body weight for those rats, and 3,000 made out to be the best. Therefore, this 3 grams is more for a 150-pound person. If you're smaller than that, you could probably go with 2,200 milligrams. If you're bigger, you might need 3,600 milligrams. And so you would take this dose 3 times a day for 7 days, always with food like breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And you could make this go out farther for a couple weeks if your symptoms are still high. Then you would taper down to 3 grams 2 times a day. So just breakfast and dinner. And then later on, you would do a maintenance phase, which is just 3 grams once a day. And so this is kind of what is the best way for prevention is just do 3 grams once per day. Again, if you're bigger, you do a little more. If you're smaller, you do a little less than 150 pounds. And then the maintenance dose is somebody that's good for somebody that has had concussions in the past, have their symptoms healed, and it's good to just continue on this maintenance. Okay, next. So besides fish oil is good for, again, decreased inflammation, but also improving the cells and the cell stability. Creatine, on the other hand, is really important for increasing good, quick brain energy. And so creatine is not just used for muscle. There has been evidence showing right here, increased brain creatine may be effective at reducing severity or enhancing recovery from mild traumatic brain injury, because we know our creatine stores in the brain are decreased after stress, decreased with as we age in the elderly, decreased in patients with dementia, and also after traumatic brain injury. And so one thing we can do is take 5 grams of creatine per day, kind of it could be multiple doses. You could do it over 2 or 3 doses in a day. But right after concussion, there has been evidence to take even more and have like a 10 to 20 gram loading dose for a week. But 5 grams are good for more of the maintenance after that, or for prevention before that. Some people do get nausea or kind of stomach upset. So it's always good to maybe start with the 5 and kind of work up to 10 to 20 either way. Then we have magnesium. And so these articles to the left here just show that magnesium decreases in the axons or in the brain cells after traumatic injury, and that magnesium then can protect against neurological deficit after injury. So preventively it can help, and then also if it's taken directly after the injury, then it can help protect against further neurological deficit. And so magnesium, there are many forms of magnesium out there. There's magnesium citrate, glycinate, taurate. Magnesium L-threonate is the best one that's been shown to enter or be able to easily enter the blood-brain barrier. And the L-threonate molecule is just another molecule that attaches to magnesium. It's like a little carrier that helps to get it into the brain. And so even though all other forms of magnesium are good for general health, magnesium threonate is one of those that is good for brain health. This bottle says 2,000 milligrams on it. You're not taking 2,000 milligrams of magnesium. It's actually 2,000 milligrams is basically mostly this L-threonate molecule. So we're looking for about 150 to 250 milligrams of elemental magnesium, which might be 2,000 milligrams of the magnesium threonate. And what this does is it helps to prevent that excitotoxicity that happens. We have magnesium can block certain channels in the brain to help prevent a neuron or a brain cell from becoming overly active. And when a brain cell is overly active, then it activates more brain cells around it. And then it causes this toxic overload where there's not a coordinated fashion of activity. And I think lastly, we have N-acetylcysteine. And so N-acetylcysteine is it's an amino acid, cysteine, and it helps to form that glutathione. Glutathione is the body's most endogenous antioxidant. And so if we take N-acetylcysteine, we should increase glutathione stores. And so the article here just shows that it's a review that human and animal studies show that there's efficacy and efficiency and safety in improving outcomes with traumatic brain injury. So it decreases oxidative stress and inflammation. Generally, preventively, 500 to 1,000 milligrams would be good. But there was a study that looked at blast injuries in U.S. servicemen and women, and they found that when giving 3 to 4 grams over the first 7 days can help decrease the neurological deficit, the acute symptoms that happen after a concussion. And so, again, something that may be beneficial is doing a loading dose, 3,000 to 4,000 milligrams per day, maybe like 1,500 in the morning, 1,500 at night, and doing that for 7 days. And that helped improve things like hearing loss, headache, memory loss, sleep disturbances, neurocognitive dysfunction in these individuals. So this is kind of the overlook here. I did not talk about a couple of these things at the bottom, but prophylactically, taking fish oil is really good. We're adding up the EPA DHA. We're taking about 3,000, maybe 2,200 to 4,200 milligrams per day, depending on someone's weight. Following a concussion, we're going to do it much more, 3 times a day for 1 week, 2 times a day for one. Creatine, again, 5 grams per day. Preventively, these are like for athletes especially, should be taking creatine, especially those ones that are in collision or contact sports. Could do 10 to 20 grams for 1 week following that traumatic brain injury. Magnesium 3 and 8, 150 to 250 milligrams of the elemental magnesium per day. And acetylcysteine, 500 to 1,000, again, taking more after traumatic brain injury. And then a couple of things I put on here is just vitamin D is really important in decreasing inflammation. So people that are living in the upper latitudes, like me here in Chicago, should be taking vitamin D if they do not get the sun. If athletes are playing sports outside, they're generally getting enough sun, but for the winter months, not as great. So, basketball, volleyball, those sports, swimming, and then a multivitamin. So there has been evidence, I didn't include any papers, that there are vitamins and minerals are going to decrease a lot following a concussion. And this goes back to what we were talking about with creatine. If there's a lot of stress in the body, stress in the brain, then there's all these energy sources that need, and the body's trying to heal. So a lot of vitamins are going to get used up very quickly. And so that's why taking a multivitamin, especially if diet is not perfect, everybody always cheats a little bit on diet. They don't get the healthiest, most nutritious foods. So taking a high quality multivitamin that includes B vitamins, fat soluble vitamins can really be beneficial. So last one is really just my references. I can leave that up here if Dr. Traster wants to have any questions, and people can kind of take a look at that. So.
Well, thank you so much for that. So much information, but it was really helpful to really understand why nutrition can play a significant role in promoting healing and promoting recovery after concussion. My one question is, what's your general recommendation for people who might want to try controlled fasting and have never done it before? What's a general recommendation for someone as far as to do it in a healthy way?
Of course. So first of all, anybody who's ever had any eating disorder should not fast. I would never recommend that. But second of all, the best way to do a controlled fast is to not plan too much for that day. Light walking, hopefully not like a stressful day at work or stressful day at school, and just to keep your mind busy, whether that be, like I said, some light walks, some reading, and taking water throughout the day. Just whenever you're hungry, drink a little bit of water. If anybody would ever feel dizzy or lightheaded when standing up because they're not eating food, that's where what's beneficial might be to add more salt. So taking a little pinch of salt or a half a teaspoon of salt and just wash it down with water. That can also be really good in that controlled fast. Speaking of which, a ketogenic diet generally wastes water fast. And so that's where adding more salt to foods is very beneficial, because there aren't a lot of processed foods in the ketogenic diet that can add more salt to one's diet. So most people are then deficient in salt and glucose, and therefore can be more dehydrated. Those are the biggest things that can go wrong with fasting, is just lightheadedness and being dizzy or those types of things. So definitely just doing less is more on the day that you're going to fast, which most people are going to do after they have a concussion. So yeah.
Sorry about that. Perfect. And when it comes to fasting, how long should you go without eating food?
So my suggestion, again, after a concussion would be just 18 to 24 hours. There is no reason to go any longer. If somebody's feeling really good afterwards, they could go 36 to 48. But when you get higher than that, that's where it does take, you should for sure talk to, a medical provider to help you with an extended fast. So yeah, 18 to 24 hours is just the best to start with.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Nick, and thank you for your time and your information, and have a great day.
Awesome. Thank you.